MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Let's commit some heresy tonight. I say that because, Dr. Litwa, you are all about talking about people that are kind of ignored by most Christians. And if they aren't ignored, they are condemned, right? They talk about, oh, you're just like that guy, Valentinius. So we like to say Valentinius was a cool guy. I mean, let's give him some credit, The guy's already been vilified for 1800, 1900 years. Let's try and be nice. But seriously, welcome to the channel. I really appreciate you joining me on this live.
Great. It's great to be here live and in interaction with folks here. Welcome to everybody. Yeah, really looking forward and jazzed for your questions.
Absolutely. I want to say up front, we just did another recording for your Patreon. So anyone who wants to join, help Dr. Litwa out, go and join. You can harass him in the message section, asking questions. You're going to have an expert in the field of early Christianity. And he really gets the 2nd century down, really, really does. And I hope our questions today are centered around a lot of that material, early 2nd century, like what's going on at the turn of the century. And this whole dating Luke Acts that we just did, right? Really interesting stuff on, is Marcion telling the truth that he had a different gospel that they changed? Is he telling the truth? And if he is, that would change the game. So anyway, consider joining him, and thank you for everybody tuning in. I do want to share my screen. I don't know why I didn't do that beforehand, just so everybody could take the chance to see what it looks like. All of these works are up here. He obviously has them on Amazon, but you could go and check out the material, joining his Patreon and videos. How many videos do you have on here? 23, it says?
So 23. There's now almost actually 45 videos, and then I've got, because I'm constantly uploading them, and so there should be by next week the full course on Found Christianities. And so this is like taking a mini course in college, but it's all based on the book. And this, I view this as kind of like the culmination of that series. So Gotcha. It's good to be here.
Yeah. On Amazon, of course, as well, the Found Christianities book, affordable paperback, $34.95. Definitely get you one. Consider joining MythVision's Patreon. Always dropping new stuff there as well. If you like what I'm doing, you can go help us out there. And we have that GoFundMe fundraiser. If you want to help us get to Israel, so I could do some filming there with my friend Gnostic Informant and Dr. James D. Tabor. He's going to take us to some archaeological sites. I'd like to go through Hezekiah's tunnel. I'd like to go visit Hanny the Circle Drawer's grave. I'd like to go see John the Baptist and sit in the seat of Pontius Pilate, assuming I'm looking down at a man who I'm verdicting whether they're guilty or innocent. I really want to experience that in real life, so consider helping us out. That's enough of my plug. I'm a shameless plug here. You know me. I got to let people know, because if I don't, who's going to tell them? Nobody.
Well, my only disappointment, Derek, is that you're not doing a GoFundMe for Australia. I mean, come on now.
Well, I will say this. Let's add something to this. It's a great point. I am having my passport updated, so traveling might be a thing. In other areas of the world other than just the Middle East areas. I don't miss those places. I was there in 2010, at least in Afghanistan, and then I was in Kuwait. Not the prettiest of places to be at the time, of course. I would much rather be in Australia than that. But Israel should be fun. Should be fun. I hope.
I'm sure you'll love it.
I hope so. We only have an hour with you, so I already have people asking questions and showing love here. Clark Morledge, do we want to jump into these now, or did you want to make a brief comment about what we're going to maybe dive into and then take questions?
Well, so if I can just have 2 minutes just to look at this slide for a second.
Nice.
So I know this is kind of a little bit hard to read, but I just wanted to give your viewers the full extent of, the figures that I study and the rough datings that we can tell. So I begin with Simon of Samaria. So he's about 35 to 70. I also discuss Menander. who's late 1st century, Cerinthus, another late 1st century, Nicolaitans in the book of Revelation, also late 1st century. And then starting to get into the 2nd century, I've got Saturninus, I've got Euphrates and Akembes, early 2nd century, Marcion, obviously, the seed of Seth, and then the great Egyptian theologians of the early 2nd century. So Vasileides, Carpocrates, Valentinus, Ptolemy, Julius Cassianus, and then Marcus, Tatian, starting to get into the late 2nd century, Marcellina, a great female representative here, Apelles, Marcion's most famous disciple, Noetus, Philumene, another very important female Christian leader, Prodicus in Alexandria, Theodotus in Rome, Florinus in Rome, Justin, author of Baruch, the Nicene preacher, and then the Sethians in the Refutation of All Heresy. So there is a ton of people that you may never have even heard of, but are really important for church history.
Are these are all in your book? You address every one of these individuals in that book, right?
Absolutely. Each one has a chapter or a chapter section. So you're going to find out who these people are, why they're important, and hopefully get out of this Protestant mentality that says, oh, well, the 1st century is this wonderful golden age with Jesus and the apostles. No, the apostles were invented in the 2nd century. Apostolic authority only becomes important in the 2nd century. The Bible, Christian Bible, was invented in the 2nd century. Church organization was invented in the 2nd century. The theology of the Trinity was invented in the 2nd century. There is no 1st century golden age here, folks. That's just apologetic ideology that you get from the book of Acts, which, by the way, was written in the 2nd century.
Oh, man, someone needs to clip that right there. That was powerful. All right, I'm going to jump into their questions. Obviously, this is what keeps the lights on. And, of course, their questions, 90% of the time, are better than mine. So I'm learning from their questions alone and then your answers. Clark Morledge, thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. And the question is, when inerrantist evangelical egalitarians say that the restriction against female presbyters in Timothy Titus is merely cultural, are they cheating in an attempt to save Pauline authorship?
Well, that's definitely cheating, because we know that women were extremely active in the 2nd century. And I talk about 2 or 3 of them in the book. So Philumene is a Christian prophetess. We've also got the Montanist prophetesses. We've got Marcellina, who is a disciple of Carpocrates, extremely intrepid lady, goes to Rome all by herself, sets up a church there. So these ladies are active and known and excoriated in the 2nd century. So this is simply a rear guard action of somebody trying to impersonate Paul and trying to say that women don't even speak in church. Hogwash. They do. He just doesn't want them to.
Simply put, thank you so much. That's one thing I have to say that I love about you, Dr. Litwa, is that you don't play around. So, and I really, I appreciate that, because a lot of people, I feel like, tiptoe around these subjects sometimes, and we need more scholars like you. So thank you. Jason Stewart, thank you so much. What is your view on Gnostic Ebionites or Elkosites? Am I saying that right? Elkosites?
Nope, Elkosites is fine. Yeah, so these are, I wouldn't call these Gnostic, but these are groups, baptizing groups in the area of modern Israel and Jordan, who also worship Christ as a divine being or a man who became divine. Elkosites are very important because actually Mani, of the Manichaean fame, the founder of Manichaeism, was, as a boy, an Elkosite. Now, Ebionites are simply Christians who also follow aspects of Jewish law. Christians always picked and choose, but we don't call them Ebionites anymore, because this is another one of these heresiological slurs. And Ebion is just, well, this is somewhat accurate. It goes back to the Hebrew word for poor. So if an Ebionite is just someone who's impoverished. Now, this could, I mean, and maybe some might argue that this is something positive because poverty was actually encouraged by Jesus himself. But when the heresiologists use it, they use it as a slur to talk about their impoverished intellect, because by the 2nd century, they can't understand why anybody is following Jewish law in any literal sense. That is, Christians in Rome. So they look at, Christians in Israel and Jordan as heretics. Whereas, in fact, they probably have a better claim to being, connected to the James movement in the early 1st century and being so-called original. You'll often hear these Christians referred to as Jewish Christians. That's, I guess, accurate to a point. I mean, they were actually Judeans in some case, or of Jewish ethnic descent, but basically they don't have to be. They're just Christians who follow more of the Torah than most Western Christians.
Thank you so much. Neil, Gnostic Informant, and you've always go on his channel too, so I really appreciate the super chat, my brother. Good looking out. Go check out David Litwa's Patreon, ! You will achieve true gnosis and know the riddle of the Orphic mysteries. Seriously, though, I can't plug it enough. Dr. Lit was trying to get this off the ground. He's looking for more people who, he's not looking for a free handout. He's looking for ways to give back. And a lot of academics are starting to head in this direction, especially with the way the world's going. So he could use that help. And that's all down in the description as well. And I even pinned it in the comments section. So if you're wondering, how do I find his Patreon? It's right there in front of your face. Let those who have eyes see. Anyway, Clark Morledge, thank you again for the super chat. When inerrantist evangelical egalitarians say that the restriction against, it's the same one. Well, you answered this, I think. Thank you for the super chat. Seriously, appreciate the help. Scott Daniel, to what extent does the Gospel of Thomas reflect real proto-Gnostic strains in 1st century Christianity, or is it strictly a 2nd century development?
Great question. And this is an apologetic minefield, because it used to be that in the 80s and 90s, very good scholars were all arguing that the Gospel of Thomas was, in some ways, even more original than Mark was. And the problem with the Gospel of Thomas is we only have the full version in the Coptic. So, and this version of the Coptic goes back to a Greek version, but the version that we have indicates that that it was finished, or at least, or completed, I think, probably after Bar Kokhba, probably about 140. And the reason why I think that is because if you look at saying 71, Jesus, there's a saying of Jesus that says, that the temple will never be rebuilt again. And up until the Bar Kokhba War, the Jews definitely anticipated the temple to be rebuilt. They definitely wanted that. They definitely had funding, and at some point they thought that Rome was going to do it back in Trajan's day. But Bar Kokhba, that entire war soured everything and destroyed all hopes of rebuilding, and Jews weren't even allowed in Jerusalem for the next 200 years. So the person who's writing that prophecy where Jesus says, the temple will never be rebuilt, is most likely writing at a point where they knew that already, and there was no good sign of it. So that's probably after Bar Kokhba. Now, that doesn't mean that the traditions, many of the traditions in the Gospel of Thomas aren't early in 1st century. But again, try to avoid this apologetic ideology of the 1st century as some kind of golden era of authenticity. It's not. It never was. Christians, all these sayings, most of them are oral, and they have a pre-existence, in the oral sphere long before they end up written in books. But I think my own opinion is that, most of the sayings come together in the early 2nd century. Then you have a finished product about 140. And I think most scholars now would say that, we're not, when you use those proto terms, like proto-Orthodox, they sort of, or proto-Gnostic, they sort of just are are kind of anachronisms, right? So, I mean, it's Thomas is Thomas. Thomas, I would say, is an ascetic Christian gospel where he's recommending that people, Jesus is recommending, stop practicing Jewish customs, stop doing all that is completely unnecessary, and just understand the truth from yourself. You're not going to find it anywhere else. It has to come from you. So do we, through self-knowledge, through self-deification practices, that's the Jesus of the Gospel of Thomas. So is that Gnostic? I don't think so, because there's not any evil creator. There's not any interest in the creator. And so I don't know. I mean, and there's no firm dualism between, say, like a heavenly existence and an earthly one. I mean, there is elements of dualism, but it's not really strong. There's nothing. Thomas doesn't say that he dislikes earthly existence, or that he hates the world. So it doesn't really. It's not really proto-Gnostic either. I mean, so there you go. But it's a fascinating text. It's another text where it shows that Christians are inventing themselves, that they are putting words in the mouth of Jesus, that they want Jesus to represent their form of Christianity. And it shows that it's no different for the other Gospels, folks. Okay, it's no different for the other Gospels. They are doing the same thing, and it's showing the kind of Christianity that they themselves want to live. When? Late first, early second century.
Thank you. Stop scamming, man. Thank you so much for the super chat. Hi, do you think Jesus was inspired by the teachings of Hillel the Elder?
Ooh, wow, that's not in my wheelhouse, but I would say, I mean, maybe, but I don't see any evidence. I guess you could compare sayings and find a bunch of parallels, but the problem with parallels is they don't tell you whether there was actually a genetic influence. So you can say that this idea is similar to that idea, but until you get someone saying, I got this from X, you don't really have proof of genetic connection. I think like Hillel the Elder really becomes important for later rabbis who are actually, we don't know how important he was when he lived. So whether Jesus from Galilee would have known or cared about him, I also don't really know. And it's always important to keep in mind that some of these later figures that become famous, like Honi the circle drawer, like Rabbi Akiva, and they're heroes in the rabbinic literature, which is, hundreds of years after Jesus. The Mishnah is 200 CE, so it's 170 years after Jesus. So these figures, which are memorialized later, may or may not have been important in Jesus' own time.
Thank you so much. Doc Pleuromanot says, wouldn't Jewish mysticism like Enoch's self-deification into type of seven heaven pleroma have resonated with sects like the Sethians as the embodiment of the higher spirit? These are some good questions. Ed, did you expect to come here for this?
Well, no, actually, so Enoch is really important for second century, right? So we know that Enoch is important because Enoch is quoted in the letter of Jude, and Enoch appears in the Apocalypse of Peter. Enoch appears in other second century Christian literature. They love Enoch, and Enoch only becomes a heretic really in the third and fourth centuries, where some Christians just stop copying it, and that's why we only have the full copies of First Enoch in Ethiopic, because only the Ethiopic church put that into their canon. But we know in the second century, Enoch was big news. Christians are reading Enoch. So absolutely, study Enoch. And I would definitely call what happens in chapter 71 of Enoch, 70 and 71, a deification. I'm not sure it's a self-deification, but in those chapters, you have Enoch becoming the son of the human, basically. His body is transmogrified, his flesh melts off, and then he becomes the son of the human. And he also becomes an angel in second Enoch, chapter 22. So those are parallel descriptions of Enoch's deification. It's a deification that occurs in his lifetime, and it occurs through some kind of ascent. And I wouldn't call it a visionary ascent, because I think for the Enochic people, they actually think his literal body rose to heaven and then was like fried off or transmogrified, like his flesh melted, and then he got a new body, an angelic one, which was made of light, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, that's important. It's important for understanding, because he's a parallel example of a deified human, right? Someone in memory, in Christian and Jewish memory, who is deified. Do sects like Christians, like so-called Sethians, do they pay attention to Enoch? Yeah, interestingly, I don't see a whole lot of interaction with Enoch, actually, but they do like Melchizedek as a divinized man. We have a whole document called Melchizedek in the Nag Hammadi library. And they definitely like Adam. We've got the Apocalypse of Adam in the Nag Hammadi library. They definitely like, they're not so much into Moses and David. In fact, they're made fun of constantly in
That reminds me of Enoch, actually, in a way. Maybe it's a version of its own Melchizedekian type of thing, because Enoch's its own Tanakh in a way. It's kind of not really following Moses at all.
That's a good point. Yeah. So you'll find that these, I call them the seed of Seth, or Sethians is fine. You'll find that they like the pre-Mosaic patriarchs, but Moses and afterward were just a bunch of losers. So yes, that could be called. That could be called like an Enochic emphasis. So maybe, but again, I can't. I don't know if that's real influence or just sort of common sentiment. So, great question. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David Aaron Hill. Thank you for the 666. His question is, how confident can we be that we have 7 real Pauline epistles, despite generously dated texts such as 1 Clement and Ignatius? We don't hear anything about Paul until the late 2nd century via Marcion's detractors, or Marcion's detractors.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I like that. I like that very historical thinking. And it is a mystery, actually, and well worth further study of why we get a Pauline canon, and I can recommend, or why we get a collection of Pauline letters, and I can recommend Harry Gamble's book, Books and Readers in Early Christianity. He was my Dr. Vater, actually, my advisor, and yeah, as his theory was, in the late 1st century, somebody, we don't know who, put together a very purposeful collection of Pauline letters to 7 churches. And 7 was important because it also interacted with the letters to the 7 churches in the Book of Revelation. So, but how much Christians were remembering Paul between, say, about the year 65 and 100? We have almost nothing. I mean, the author of Revelation himself doesn't really interact with Paul, and
he might condemn him, actually. If you take Elaine Pagel's view on Revelation 2, she thinks there might be a condemnation of Paul's church, that they are fornicators and I can't remember, eating meat sacrificed to idols and such.
Yeah, possibly. Definitely, that could be viewed as a Pauline position. Sure, absolutely. So yeah, there's that in the mix. And then when you come down to the question of authenticity, well, you have to ask yourself some real important historical questions, and that is, where did we get these letters? Who preserved them? Did Paul himself keep copies of his own letters so that they could be easily collected? Did individual assemblies or churches keep copies of the letters? If so, why? Who has control of them between about 65 to 100, and why? And are they viewed as important? And what's the evidence? So those are questions I don't know, and that's why this is such a great question from David Aaron Hill. This deserves a whole lot more research, and I hope that some of you will help out here.
Yeah, this is and so Dr. Price, in a sense, is not so crazy after all when it comes to Paul. I mean, you might disagree with him on his mythicism, but he takes a more critical approach on Paul's letters. And so this isn't my show today. This is This is yours in the audience. And so let's keep moving. Zachary, thank you so much, my friend, for the big super chat. Always love the support. And here it is. I attended a service as child. The pastor argued the early days of Christianity, the following was so small. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity could never have grown, if you will, to what it is now. Dr. Litwa, how do you respond?
Well, historically, yes, it was pathetically small, and pathetically small even in the 2nd century. It was, I mean, it was a weird cult movement, and most aristocratic Romans just took no notice of it, or whenever they referred to it, just was like, what is this? And the first time a Greco-Roman writer feels the need to do a full-scale attack on Christians is about 177 with Celsus. So that's, geez, I mean, that's obviously well after Jesus. So that's a good indication of, the first time where a Roman or a Greek writer actually felt threatened by Christianity, threatened enough to do a full-scale attack, was late in the 2nd century. So absolutely, they're small. And yeah, they would have looked pathetic, even into the 3rd century. Okay. But it's certainly a theological claim to say that, that the resurrection, by which I think is meant a physical resurrection, somehow was involved in the demographical growth of Christianity. I mean, if the resurrection did produce an explosion of growth, it came really, really late. It must have been a really, really delayed effect. I mean, let's face it. The thing that really caused Christianity to grow was that it became the state religion in, the year 313. Okay, or a recognized religion, and then very much the state religion, and then the official and only religion by about 380. So you can tell, people are motivated to join Christianity for all different sorts of reasons. But when you lose your job, if you're not a Christian, well, that's a great motivation to join. So really, when Christianity gets the numbers, that we're used to today, that's late in the 4th century. So, wow. And this would be a separate idea from, was it the case that, people were attracted to Christianity because it promised immortality through resurrection? Well, that was certainly one factor, but other groups were, offering that as well. So you have to think more complex about that one.
Okay. Thank you so much. I thought that was an angel trying to say something. Doc Floroma, thank you again for the super chat. How was Marcion successful evangelizing a novel religion with open condemnation of the Old Testament, given antiquity, would be highly esteemed? Banning natural progeny would have relied solely on converts.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about Marcion. Marcion must have been so convincing that he didn't need baby machines to pump out more Christians. I mean, that has always and ever been the best way to produce Christians. That is through giving birth to them and then enculturating them at a young age. Okay. And Marcion's movement grows even when he's discouraging people from getting married. so I mean, that's the amazing thing about Marcion. Like, that must have been really a convincing message.
Yeah.
That's definitely not going to go over well today. What? Don't get married? That's what my grandmother told me. But, I mean, she had a rough life. But, I mean, it's not a popular message, right? So that says something amazing about his recruiting skills. I mean, for Marcion, it wasn't a novel religion. It was just true Christianity. And yes, texts from the Septuagint were viewed as old. They might not actually have been that old, like maybe, I mean, in their final forms, maybe about 250 to 300 years old. But they definitely were perceived as old. But there's a common bias, and it's so firmly rooted in, I guess, the evangelical mind, that people just presume that the so-called Old Testament was always part of the Christian Bible. And I just keep repeating myself, it wasn't. I mean, it really wasn't. Why do you make that assumption? Marcion might have grown up without ever hearing of the so-called Septuagint or Old Testament, or he might never have opened it, even if he knew about it. And like many Christians or atheists today, or who don't know anything about Christianity, and they started the book of Genesis, they're like, what is this? I mean, this is like, oh my God. I mean, well, most people, when they get to the genealogies, just stop. But when they, right after Genesis 5 is Genesis 6 with the world flood. And then, all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And so, yeah, this might have been Marcion's experience. It's not the case that all Christians were reading the Old Testament as an authoritative text. They might just have had a single gospel, and that's it. And we really don't know the situation in the late 1st and 2nd century. And if you're reading Paul, who's citing the Old Testament left and right, it's false to assume that his hearers knew anything, that he was talking about. I mean. And his heroes weren't their heroes, and it took generations for people to get defamiliarized with Odysseus and Aeneas, and then start learning about David and Isaiah. I mean, I think most Christians and most Gentile Christians in late 1st and early 2nd century would have been like, David and Isaiah? Who? I mean, it's really gradual where that cultural shift happens. And so that's the great thing about history is, please, don't make assumptions. Don't accept these apologetic assumptions that the Old Testament was always authoritative for Christians. Prove it if you think so. And don't just use Paul.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm going to take this banner down just so everybody knows. I don't want to not be able to get everybody's super chats. So keep that in mind. Right now, I'm going to try my best to make sure I can get everybody's questions along the way, because we have so many that are here. And thank you for everybody who's supporting. I just was going to mention, I'm going to be interviewing Christopher Stanley. I don't know if you know who he is, Pauline scholar. He actually, his whole argument is exactly in this vein of like Paul's use of scripture and how Paul's audience, who would have been Gentiles, maybe a mixed multitude, but oftentimes would have been Gentiles, would have had no clue what he was arguing. That's why he could make these kind of strange arguments like Galatians 3, and it would go over his audience's head. But maybe the local rabbi would go, nice try. Or maybe he had a weird argument too. We don't know. Anyway, moving on. Jason Anderson, thank you for the super chat. Good to see you here. What's your take on Bultmann's view that Gospel of John is a proto-Montanist text? Is there any Gnostic overtones, or is it strictly reactionary against?
Well, thanks so much, Jason. It's a great question. As far as I know, Bultmann's view was that John wasn't proto-Montanist, but that it depended on what Bultmann called a Gnostic Redeemer myth, that there was a previous text prior to John which spoke about the incarnation of a Gnostic Redeemer who came to earth from the heavenly zones and appeared on earth and saved people, basically. And so, when we found the Nag Hammadi library, we were all excited, and we're still excited, because we wanted to see if Bultmann was right, because Bultmann was writing at a time where we didn't have all those great texts from Nag Hammadi. Okay. And it turns out that he's partially confirmed. If you look at the Nag Hammadi text called Trimorphic Protonea, or three, sorry, that's a mouthful, but that text indicates that it might have been written prior to the prologue of John, and in which case this text also talks about that you have a situation where a wisdom becomes incarnate, and she becomes incarnate 3 times, and she comes and saves people. And then you have to ask, well, how old is this wisdom mythology? Is it 1st century? And for that, you could turn to Simon of Samaria, who might have had a wisdom myth. You could turn to Menander. You could turn to Saturninus. These are all very early Christian thinkers who may or may not have had a wisdom myth. And then see if see if it has enough parallels to John's Logos theology, so that essentially the theory would be there was a pre-existent wisdom myth who comes down and is incarnate in a person and then saves people. And then John changed wisdom to Logos and made that incarnate person into Jesus of Galilee. And we're still actually exploring that. And I hope you join us in that journey, basically, because we're still creating the world of the 2nd century, trying to understand why this theology came into existence historically.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Joseph, I hope I'm saying it right. Joseph, pardon? Thank you for the super chat. Please respond to this argument. I think the best proof of the truth of Christianity is that Christianity still exists after all the persecutions.
Well, I have to laugh a little bit about that, because the most recent research in early Christianity really shows that Christians weren't heavily persecuted. And this is part of evangelical and apologetic myth, that, you know, the apostles wouldn't have died for what they didn't think was, you know, absolutely true. Well, the fact is most apostles didn't die. And those myths about the apostles dying are all late 2nd and 3rd century. Okay. In what are called the apostolic acts. And, you know, there's the Acts of Andrew and the Acts of Thomas and the Acts of Philip and the Acts of Bartholomew, and all those texts you should know about, but they're not 1st century texts. And I mean, there's really not a whole lot of evidence that apostles were dying left and right. Okay. They weren't. They really weren't. Most of them died of old age. Most of them didn't even recognize themselves as apostles. Okay. So let's stop reading the 1st century in light of later developments. That's the first thing. And then I can recommend to you, I'm not an expert on martyrdom, but Candida Moss has a couple good books on martyrdom, and you can go take a look at that and look her up, MOSS. Basically, she shows that, yeah, this ideology of, oh, we're being martyred, I mean, it's not that common. So there were Christian martyrs, but it's not at all common, folks. And it's not organized. The very first organized persecution of Christians is the Decian persecution, which is in 250. Okay, so mid-3rd century, 250 to 52. That's the first time Rome gets its act together and does anything that's halfway organized. Everything before that was local and sporadic. I mean, most of the time the Romans could have cared less, because, you know, they just don't care. And the only way you could get yourself killed was if somebody turned you in. I mean, and that was only for, you know, very sporadic individuals. So let's just lay that apologetic argument to rest and just deal with the history, the facts, and the concrete data that we have. Okay.
I get that all the time. Like, someone wants to debate me, and I don't have all day to debate you, dude, but they want to debate you in the chat, and they're like, Christianity is just so unique. It cannot have developed. You got to imagine it's miraculous because of this and that. And then they get into this whole martyrdom thing about this constant persecution. Would you have done that? And I think it is a reflection, like you just said, but I need to reach back out to Candida Moss, because I wrote her when I only had like 3,000 or 4,000 subs, like 2.5 years ago when I first got into this. And she probably looked at my channel and went, no, thanks. You know, but maybe now she might look and go, I've been watching you, because I was shocked to find out there were other academics who actually turned me down early on. And then I wrote them back and they went, you know what? You've grown into be quite an interviewer and quite a good show. So I was really impressed with that. Anyway, moving on. Stop Scamming Man. Thank you so much. I appreciate the super chat. Hi, how old are the earliest copies and fragments of the book of Revelation? Also, on a scale of 9 to 10, how likely is it to the righteous dead rose in Jerusalem, just like Matthew says? On a scale from, I think, 1 to 10.
Yeah, if it's 9 to 10, I don't know. I like that. This is a brilliant question, and I love answering this question because, you know, again, it's part of this evangelical culture that I think is mostly endemic in the States, but the revelation is like, oh my God, it's the greatest of all Christian texts. You know, people are reading it. The mailman is writing a commentary on it. I mean, it's just, for some people, it's just like so fascinating. Was it in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century? No, not at all. I mean, this text struggled to even get any attention whatsoever. And really, it's not until the 4th century that Christians in the East are finally like, okay, we will let this be read in church, because I mean, it was not popular. Okay, so that's really important to notice. And again, it's really important to avoid anachronism, where it's like, whoa, we think the Book of Revelation, everybody's read that, it's so important. Nope. And yeah, they're not interacting with it widely at all, especially in the 2nd century. I think earliest copies and fragments of it, I don't know this actually off the top of my head, but I would guess, like for most Christian papyri, we probably got something in the 3rd century in terms of a manuscript fragment. We might have some late 2nd century, like we do for the Gospels. But yeah, not many. And I think that you'll be sorely disappointed if you ask a real expert here on the Book of Revelation. This is not a common text, not a commonly cited text. But Matthew absolutely was. Matthew was very, very common, very, very well cited text, even in the 2nd century. It seems like everybody knew and loved Matthew. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so our canon is not what they were reading. Okay, but in the case of Matthew, absolutely, they like that text. And I think it's absolutely unlikely that there were dead zombies running around in Jerusalem. And I mean, if you know, it's just, you know, this is just the question that historians ask, and I don't want to make fun of this, because I think it's always important to treat everything seriously. But even scholars of Matthew, and I think Dale Allison would be a great person to ask this, is like, this appears nowhere else. This is just silly. I mean, no other gospel writer supports this. This is just a weird theory of Matthew. He was probably thinking of some passage in the Old Testament which we didn't even know about, maybe an apocryphal text, I don't know. But for somehow this proves something to Matthew. And where did the zombies go? I don't know. Did they dig their own graves and jump back in? I don't know. Did they live?
If you can self-deify, you should be able to self-bury. You know what I mean?
No, maybe they're still in Jerusalem, and you'll find them in Hezekiah's time. So,
all right. David F., thank you for the super chat. In the Authentic Paul SV, it says 2 Corinthians was missing until it appeared in Marcion's canon. Did Marcionites edit it into its present form, or Orthodox?
Well, it's a great question, and I probably, you probably get annoyed at me for doing this, but I just remind everyone in the audience that the categories that we have aren't the categories that they had in the 2nd century, and orthodoxy and heresy isn't a thing. Okay, so Marcion just introduces himself as a Christian, and whoever put the first Pauline, whoever put the first Pauline collection together, as far as I know, 2 Corinthians was in there. There's lots and lots of theories about how the Corinthian letters got put together. Unfortunately, we don't really know, and there's lots of interpolation theories and lots of theories where 1 Corinthians at least is this combination of several letters, maybe up to 5, and you can read Margaret Mitchell on this. Basically, yeah, I think that Marcion read both 1st and 2nd Corinthians. I think that most people by the 2nd century are going to be familiar with both 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And it's widely claimed, usually by apologists, both in antiquity and today, that Marcion edited his canon. And there's actually the heresiologists like Tertullian noticed actually that he really didn't. And so, go read Tertullian's Against Marcion. Tertullian is always like, he should have edited this, but he didn't. So the whole question of Marcion doing an edit job on the gospel and epistles has to be reevaluated. It doesn't look like he's doing much work at all. He's just using a text that he's familiar with. And by the 2nd century, we know that Christian texts were fluctuating because they're manuscripts. They're not always going to be the same. and every copy is going to be different. Even if someone just sneezes and writes something different, or is half asleep and writes out the wrong word, or is theologically has a problem with one word and so replaces it with another. So yes, there are different texts, but not because Marcion is there saying, oh, I'm just going to change all this stuff. No,
Right.
no, not consciously, not readily. That's not what he does.
Thank you so much. David Aaron Hill. I'm in the right spot. Even if you have to speculate, what eco-theological school is it Egerton gospel fragments closest to?
Well, actually, I have to say that I'm not familiar with eco-theological school, but the Egerton gospel is simply a gospel fragment found in the papyri of 2nd century Egypt. And what's really fun about the Egerton gospel is that it's a gospel we've never heard of. It looks sort of like the gospels we know, but it's got different stories, different words. And so we know that this was a fragment of a gospel that we don't even know what was the full content of it. And it's in Egypt, so people are reading it in 2nd century Egypt, but it's one of those things where it's like, wow, geez, I mean, how much have we lost here? Because we've never even heard. We don't have this gospel anywhere else. It's a fragment that's different than everything else. Now it has parallels to Luke and Matthew, but that's about as best as we can do. It's not Luke and Matthew. And that's the fun thing, and it should always remind us that the world of the 2nd century is a jungle, and we've lost 80 to 90% of it. So don't let anybody, including me, tell you exactly how the Christian story went.
Yeah.
Especially when we're, missing 80% of the data.
So we have like 15 to 20 minutes. And so I want to try and make sure that I don't leave anyone hanging here. So if you're super chatting because you want to ask a question, I only have a certain amount of time left, so I don't want to leave you hanging. So if it doesn't get said in time, please forgive me in advance. I'm trying to get these knocked out.
I'll try to be quick.
Yeah, I don't want to offend anyone. I had a person who was upset because I did this interview and missed out on their super chat. So hi again. Are the text of how do you pronounce this?
Oxyrhynchus
being digested and made available? Also, any translations of these texts in books or online you recommend?
Digitized. Yeah, I think that they are. And
did I say digested? I said digested.
Yeah. According to Derek, they're eating these papyri. We have to stop them.
I'm reading Isaiah, okay, and Jeremiah. They ate the papyri, okay? So
no, it's okay. Perfectly fine. So yeah, that's the unfortunate thing about Oxyrhynchus, and everybody should know about Oxyrhynchus. Oxyrhynchus had a trash heap that was explored in the late 19th and early 20th century, and that's where we found the first copies of the Greek Gospel of Thomas at Oxyrhynchus. Okay, and these texts were published in Greek, but a lot of them, they haven't actually been published or appeared in English. But there are hundreds of Christian texts that some of them we don't even know what they are, and we're still piecing these together, a couple or at least 100 years later. So I think, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think slowly more and more is coming out. Most of them are just fragments, just like a credit card size fragment from works that some work has been done on in the scholarship, but sometimes not. And so if you run a Google search just on the Oxyrhynchus papyri and see if there is like an official scholarly website that's maybe run out of, usually it's probably going to be a university that's going to be run out of the UK. Check that out. And unfortunately, I'm not an expert, so I have to punt a little bit. But
all right, Neophyte One, thank you for the super chat, Dr. Litwa. If I may respectfully push back on your theory, how does a failed apocalyptic prophet who died a humiliating death fulfill the Roman archetype of hero and become divine within living memory?
Well, he might not have become divine within living memory. I mean, we don't exactly know, because there's that dark period between about 30 and 100 where we have no data. I mean, there's no manuscripts, so we don't know what was said. So we always have to be humble and just say that, you know, we've lost a lot, and that's why we can't always be fixated on the first century, because it's just simply a wasteland and a void. So what we have is second century memories of the first century. And by the second century, they don't view Jesus as a failed apocalyptic prophet. That's all modern theories. And it's actually, but the point to remember here is that, you know, among many Greek heroes, one of the things that made you a hero was that you died an awful, excruciating death. Okay. And so, you know, you're a political victim. There's a famous example of a hero who went into like an ancient kindergarten, killed a bunch of kids, then jumped inside a large chest and locked himself in. And then people came after him and chopped it up with axes, and he wasn't there anymore. And then it just took a year and he was worshipped as a hero. I mean, this is the story. I mean, I'm just telling you the story. I mean, and then there are people who have died violently or disappeared or been murdered in the night or have been killed by tyrants, and they also become heroes. And because, you know, the Oracle of Delphi says, this is a hero and you should worship him, otherwise he's going to be angry. And so that's a pattern in Greek thought long before Jesus. So in fact, I mean, Christians, again, apologists really make a big deal out of, you know, well, you never have a God who dies on a cross. Well, true, but you have dozens of heroes who die violent deaths and then are heroized or deified. I mean, we have to be careful with our language, but they are in some ways venerated or worshipped after their death. And I give several examples of this in my book, How the Gospels Became History. You can look up an old book, but it should be free online, by Farnell, called Greek Hero Cults, and find all sorts of this. But
how do you spell his name?
I believe it's Farnell, and yeah, Greek Hero Cults. That was like early 20th century. And then if you type in Greek hero cults into a modern academic research search library or even Google Scholar, you'll find a ton more resources. So check it out.
Thank you so much. Doc Pleroma's back. Do you think Marcion worked with a proto-L, Luke, I think, and a further redaction layer, Luke 1 through 2, was added later to address his denigration of birth and of Jesus' humanity, consequences for dating norms aside?
I absolutely think that, and that was a live session with Derek about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you can check that out on Dating Luke Acts. I absolutely think that Marcion had a copy of Luke, but that his copy of Luke didn't include the birth narratives, which is chapters 1 through 4, or chapters 1 through 2, sorry, and it didn't include a lot of other material, and that our canonical Luke was an expanded redaction or edited version that is responding in many ways to Marcion. That's absolutely what my theory, my hypothesis, and for some of the evidence for that, check out that video on Dating Luke Acts, where I also give a bunch of sources that you can go read up on. And yeah, dating norms, forget about dating norms. This is just rehashed things that people repeat. There's no norms. There's just hard work trying to figure out when did this document emerge. And we can't be simplistic because documents are always changing, especially in this period, late first, early second century.
Thank you so much. Jason Anderson, we're told Constantine converted to Christianity, but which type? We know many emperors after were Arians. Arians, and could we imply the same about Constantine? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's probably nothing orthodox about Constantine. Okay, Constantine helps to invent orthodoxy by calling the Council of Nicaea in 325, which he presides over. I mean, he doesn't understand what's going on, but he knows that Christians are fighting and ready to kill each other, and so he calls them all together. It's the first state-funded conference of bishops, and he's the one who funds it. But does he understand any of the theology, and does he care? No. All he cares about is what common political rulers care about. That is, give me something that can unite my people. Give me a religion that I can say is universally true and then create social coherence, okay? And give me a creed so that I can say everybody has to believe this. And that's what he does. That's exactly how a politician thinks. Does he care about the niceties of theology? No. And in fact, Constantine waits until his dying breath even to be baptized. So, what was going on there? And he has coins, indicating that he worships the sun, the Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. So, what is his theology? Probably nothing that we would consider orthodox. But the bishops didn't care because they were getting paid now, when sent on holiday to go, have church councils and, get bigger paychecks. Did they care? No. I mean, Putin is in charge of Russia and supports Russian Orthodoxy. Does he care about theology? No, probably not. Does the Ayatollah in Persia and Iran care about theology? I don't know. But it sure, brings people together. Islam, whether it's Islam or Christianity or something else, it can be used as a political tool to unite people.
Wow. Thank you so much. Zachary Johnson, where in the Bible does it talk about pizza rolls?
There's a rule in scholarship that if you really don't know the answer to a question and you're really not an expert in that area, you just say, don't know. And so there you go. I do not know. But
it's there, though. It's there. Just keep looking. Constellation Pegasus, what do you think the Bible would be like if Marcion didn't exist?
Well, now that's an interesting kind of thought experiment question, because yes, Marcion is really the first person who says, guess what? I've got something that I'm ready to call the New Testament, and it's got 11 books, and this is my doctrine, and nobody can be adding crap to it because there's not 4 gospels who are contradicting each other. There's just one, and don't mess around with me, okay? So forget this ridiculous, stuff where you're just adding a bunch of pseudo-Pauline epistles and a bunch of other gospels. So if Marcion didn't exist, I don't know. I mean, I think that you might have had a delayed reaction. There might not even have been a united Roman Church, which called itself Catholic or Universal. Their diffusion and difference in theology might have been allowed to persist more. You might never have had the need for a canon. I mean, I just don't know, but it's certainly a very fascinating question. So thanks for raising it.
Thank you. The Messiah rides a donk. 1 Corinthians 15:10. 1 Corinthians 15:10. Paul quotes Exodus, referring to himself as "I am who I am." Does this have to do with the idea that Christians will be exalted even above angels? 1 Corinthians 6:3, or is this just vanity?
So 1 Corinthians 15:10. Let me just take a quick look at it. Okay, I see what you're saying. So by the grace of God, I am who I am. Yeah, that's interesting. So is Paul claiming the divine name, I am who I am? That's interesting. I'm going to have to punt on that one. I don't actually know, but Paul definitely did say that Christians would judge angels, and I think that he did definitely think that Christians would be better than angels in terms of status. And he said that we had a pneumatic body that is a spirit body, which is probably better than angels too. And if you look at texts like the Ascension of Isaiah, where Isaiah, is angelified, he also seems to be better than angels. And then this becomes very common in Christian literature, where angels always play second fiddle to deified human beings. So whether it's vanity or not, I honestly don't know. And most people would, I think, just take that as saying, like more like Popeye rather than Yahweh, I am who I am, and you can't change that. But I don't know, maybe you're onto something. Thanks.
Wow. Yeah, interesting. David F., will you ever have April DeConnick on your show? I wrote her name down. The name has come across my desk over and over. I will email, and well, I need to first look up what I would be interested in interviewing on, and then email. So thank you for bringing that up, David. Constellation Pegasus, did the adulterous woman's story appear 1,000 years from the oldest Bible found? I bet 98% of Christians don't realize it's a forgery.
Well, I think you're right on the latter claim, and there's been some wonderful work on this, and in fact, an entire recent book on this particular episode. I don't think it's not 1,000 years, but I believe it's safe to say that it's definitely a 2nd century story that's been woven into John. It might have been free floating. And like other things, there are just things that get added to biblical books. So John 21 gets added, Mark 16, 8 through just basically the end, Mark 16, 8 through 16-ish gets added as an ending to Mark in the 2nd century. So the idea of people adding stuff, and obviously I think Luke, canonical Luke, has added the birth narrative and a bunch of other stuff to a text, to Proto-Luke. And so, yeah, this is definitely a trend. And it apparently, yeah, it's just a nice story that they thought they could throw into John. And I don't know why.
They valued it in some way. Keith Gardick, thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. I appreciate it. Was the supernatural view of Genesis 6, 1 through 6, 1 through 6, 4, sorry, 1 through 4, the majority view in early Christianity? And that's the sons of God came down, and these are actual divine beings, not humans. What was the majority view in early Christianity? Was it the divine view? Or was it this whole theory that it's the line of Seth and the line of Cain? Humans.
Yeah, I take this as very similar to the question about Enoch, because in Enoch, the Watcher myth has angels coming down and impregnating human women. And so those are definitely divine beings or semi-divine or whatever you want to call them. And definitely, I do think that that's the majority view. I think Enochic readings of Genesis are all over the 2nd century, and Tertullian confirms that. Probably Paul confirms that, because he says that, women should wear veils in church because of the angels. He's probably thinking about angels getting the hots for women and,
yeah,
raping them. I mean, it sounds crazy today, but that probably is the case. So yes, absolutely. Superhuman beings raping human women, that's there. It's possible. And there you go.
Wow. Interesting question. I don't know has ever been asked like that on the channel. So good question. Thank you. The Messiah rides a donkey's back. When did early Christians begin to see the transubstantiation as literal? And we only have a few more here. Dr. Litwa, I'm trying to get us through, so forgive me.
That's okay. Yep. So I'll just run through these quickly. So transubstantiation, probably the official view is medieval, because it's based on Thomistic theology, where a thing can have a substance and then accidents. So a thing can be substantially the body of Christ, but have the accidents, that is the external qualities of bread. And that's Thomistic. So that's medieval, and that's an easy one. So that's not even in the 2nd century. But could it have possibly been the case that they viewed this bread that they ate in the Eucharist as like deifying? Absolutely, because Ignatius says that it's the bread of immortality. So it literally makes you into a divine being.
Right. And I mean, there's even hints when I talked to Dr. Price recently, he thinks that the Emmaus story is kind of implying this as well. That in their breaking of the bread, the being is present, though he's not visibly present. There might be something to that, potentially. I thought that was interesting. Keith Gardick, thank you for the super chat. And I think this is our last one. It is. He says, just because you said no more, Derek's transmutation from dude bro to theological scholar is magic. I'm still a dude bro, so don't worry. I think I'll always try to be just that. So thank you for such a wonderful compliment, and it always feels good to see people see you grow. I have a lot of growing to do. I have a lot of learning to do. I can't even get digitalized correct. It's digested. And, you know, I had one person, before I let you go, Dr. Litwa, that actually commented, and it really brightens my day to see people say these positive things. They go, Derek, you're bar none. You're like a bull in a china shop. You mispronounce half the words, but we love the hell out of you. And it's like, oh, I love it, because half the time I don't get words right. I'm not going to lie. I try, though. I'm keeping track of what you're saying. I'm understanding what you're implying. I'm just redneck, okay?
Nah, I wouldn't say that. No, you're doing a great job, and we all appreciate it. I do. Creating that format where scholars can give really good, solid information. And yeah, I'm trying to do that myself. My next big project on the Patreon is to do introductions to every Nag Hammadi text. So if you're interested in Nag Hammadi, I'm going to start producing videos on Nag Hammadi texts. This is going to be my second project after doing the series on found Christianities. So
I'll post this.
Go check it out. And my thanks to Derek. We'll hopefully do another live session, maybe on just basic intro to Nag Hammadi literature. What's the Nag Hammadi, so sometimes called Gnostic find?
If I may, real quick, just so that everybody understands, like, if you would please, if you're able, if you liked what you heard and you're able to join his Patreon, he's going to see people join, and it's going to give Dr. Litwa incentive to come back on to my channel. I'm very transparent about this. I am a shameless plug, but academics who come on this channel, they see that and they go, you know what? People enjoy my work. They love what I'm doing, and I can give an excuse to the wife, right? Or, you know, to the spouse at home and say, hey, I'm going on a thing. Will you watch the kids, or will you do this? And it means a lot to me as well to hear that this is a success and that we're a family looking after people who, like Dr. Litwa, walk in here and they don't bat an eye at the apologetics. They don't even waste their time. They get straight into the material. They're dealing with the data. They're not dealing with endless arguments that have been repeated that have no validity. You got to appreciate guys like this. I mean, really, this is why I value you. This is why Neil, my buddy Neil, Gnostic Informant, values you. And we need more. We need more, Dr. Litwa. I am officially addicted, so you cannot let me withdraw too long, okay? Got to come back.
Absolutely. Yeah, but great to be here. And thanks to all, I know we only had an hour, but thanks to all to ask questions. Really appreciate it. And let's do this again and make this happen.
Absolutely. He's got books. You can help me out going to Israel if you want, down in the description. Want to make a lot of that happen. I have a Patreon as well. If you had to pick one, pick his. I really want to see him grow, and I want to see him want to come back on MythVision. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Derek.
With that being said, never forget, if you're trying to self-deify or self-bury, you can do either or. We are MythVision.
Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.